Alright guys, back with another video for you today. Today I'm doing a video on 10 alternatives to either discontinued fragrances or badly reformulated fragrances. So 10 alternatives to either fragrances that got discontinued and you can't find that fragrance, so there's an alternative for it here, or if it's really destroyed with its reformulation, it doesn't smell like it used to, a better alternative. So 10 of them today. One of the fragrances, there's 2 alternatives, and I'm going to let you know what they are coming right up. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is Sebastian. Yesterday we're talking about 10 alternatives to badly reformulated or discontinued fragrances. Is there a fragrance that you have found that replaces a discontinued fragrance, or is a great alternative to a fragrance that's been butchered with the reformulations? If you have one, do let me know. Put a comment down below so I can find out. Let's go and get started. The first fragrance I'm going to talk to you about it's from the house of Ralph Lauren. This is Polo Green, this one right here. And Polo Green is a fragrance that has many memories for me because my dad wore it and I used to, steal sprays from his bottles all the time, and I love that smell. It still smells good. I'm putting my nose to this and it smells great, but for me, when the fragrance is first sprayed, it has a really great smell. It's got that kind of pine forest smell, but eventually the leather kicks in because there's a leather here. It's a sheeper leather style, and it actually, the leather part of this fragrance smells really synthetic, and they've done a really bad job with the actual reformulation of it. So it's a bad reformulation. Originally it smelled really great, and of course, as I said, when you first spray it, it smells fantastic, but once it starts drying down and the leather appears, it smells so synthetic and bad. But I have a great alternative. It's LOEWE's Esencia EDT. To me, this smells super fantastic, and the reformulation, if it has any, because this is a fragrance from the late 80s, still smells super fantastic, and the leather in here doesn't smell as bad as the original Polo Green. So if you're looking for an alternative and you've noticed that there are changes with the Polo Green, because I noticed it quite a bit, it's pretty noticeable, especially when it's drying down and that leather comes through. It's a really bad reformulation job there. I feel like the Esencia EDT would replace it, and you'd be really nice, as a great replacement for it. I think it smells fantastic. It seems very green and pine forest like the Polo, but then its dry down is also as good as the first initial blast of this particular fragrance as well. Many of you have mentioned this about Esencia EDT, and of course a couple years ago I bought a bottle, and I do agree it's a great alternative to Polo Green. And some of you still wear Polo Green, which is fine, and as I said, when you first spray it, it smells fine, but the dry down is pretty bad. And Esencia EDT totally is a great alternative for that fragrance. So there's going to be several alternatives to men's fragrances here, because there's been some fragrances in the men's world of fragrances that have either been really badly reformulated or they've been discontinued, and I'm going to offer them. Sadly, I don't have any specifically for feminine fragrances. Perhaps on a future video I do have some unisex offerings as well, but we're moving on to the fragrance house of Michael Kors, and this is Michael for Men from 2001, and this is a fragrance I wore way back then. This is still my original bottle from 2001, and the later it gets, the more I remember how great it smelled and how beast mode it was, but it's no longer selling. Michael Kors did launch a newer version of it like in the mid 2010s. I think that version is gone as well. But what I liked about this one is the tobacco and the dried fruits. It's really beastly. Like, it was really intense, and the tobacco, the dried fruits, and plum patchouli was really in your face, and I like that about it. A few sprays and you were pretty much in a cloud, and sadly it's discontinued. And again, as I said, this is my original bottle, so this still smells great. Of course they don't make it anymore, but a great alternative of it is Animal Mondain from the house of Pierre Guillaume. To me they smell similar, but then the Animal Mondain from Pierre Guillaume does have a bit more musky animalic touch to it. The original Michael for Men from Michael Kors did not have that. So if you like the idea of a muskiness and a bit of an animalic touch with tobacco, I think this is a great alternative to Michael for Men. And Pierre Guillaume makes some really great fragrances, and you've got tobacco tobacco here, and this is a tobacco fragrance. There's light fruitiness here. This is a little more fruitier, and then of course the muskiness appears in here because there's animalic notes, and it just really is super sexy. Definitely, if you're a tobacco lover, you gotta check out Animal Mondain anyway if you haven't already, and if you're into the idea of animalics and musk, definitely check this out. And if you're looking for a great alternative for Michael for men, Animal Mondain is definitely a great alternative. So Commodity discontinued several fragrances a year or so ago. One of them is TONKA from Commodity, and actually it was a great alternative to FEVE DELICIEUSE because it smelled kind of similar to me. It's a TONKA bean balm, powdery and also resinous and sweet and vanillic, and of course bitter almonds, and almonds are in here with some spices. Sadly it's discontinued. It was a great price for this as well. I don't know why they discontinued it. I think it was a pretty popular offering, but perhaps it didn't sell, I don't know. So since it was an alternative, a less expensive alternative to FEVE DELICIEUSE, now FEVE DELICIEUSE is the alternative for TONKA if you didn't know this already. Because to me, they both remind me of one another. There were some minute differences between each other, but they focused on the TONKA beans, they focused on vanillic notes, resins, and of course there's sweets, like it's a gourmand and nutty, bitter almond, all that comes to mind with FEVE DELICIEUSE. So if you're looking for a great alternative to TONKA, I'm sure you probably already know that FEVE DELICIEUSE is similar, but if you didn't know, this would be a great alternative for TONKA from Commodity. It was always the other way around. As I said, it was a less expensive alternative to Commodity for FEVE DELICIEUSE. Now it's the other way around, as I said. But yeah, I liked both of these a lot. Really delicious TONKA bean, kind of bitter almondy, and of course sweet gourmand. But too bad Commodity's TONKA is no longer. But of course you can always get away with using FEVE DELICIEUSE. This is a very empty bottle of FEVE DELICIEUSE, a really super delicious fragrance. In fact, it's one of my all-time favorite fragrances from DIOR. I absolutely love that one. All right, the next fragrance I'm talking about is a fragrance I don't have the original form in, but I do have the alternative. It's a great alternative. I recently featured this in a Plum fragrances video. If you're into plums, please go catch that video. But this is a great alternative for Tom Ford's Plum Japonais, which I don't have a bottle here. This is Smoky Plum from ATHENA Fragrances. Are you familiar with ATHENA? Wow, this is so close to Plum Japonais that it's almost like identical. It's like a dupe of it. But Plum Japonais for me was plums, and it was spicy, it was oody, a bit smoky, ambery for sure, and it had all these unique trees like fir tree, maybe a little pine tree, and of course cypress tree. Great fragrance. Sadly, I only had one 250 ml decanter, and then when I was ready to buy another one, it was already discontinued. I didn't really seek it out, but now I'm kind of craving it, especially since I'm kind of making a turnaround for really enjoying plum fragrances. But this Smoky Plum is definitely a great alternative, and it's also very inexpensive. It's a great inexpensive alternative. Definitely it's a dupe actually, because it smells so similar to it. It has similar touches. It has the incensey touches, it has oud, it has vanillic notes, it has spices, some leatheriness from safraline, and of course ambery touches. Really great alternative for Plum Japonais. I know Plum Japonais is discontinued. Who knows, Tom Ford might bring that back, because they do keep bringing back fragrances. They haven't brought it back yet. It's almost been 10 years since they launched Plum Japonais. I think they launched it in 2013. It was pretty early on in my journey of fragrance reviewing on YouTube. So we'll see. But in the meantime, I think Athena's Smoky Plum is a great alternative, especially since it's really inexpensive alternative for Plum Japonais from Tom Ford. So one of my all-time favorite vetiver fragrances from one of my all-time favorite or very early discovery niche fragrance houses is ANNICK GOUTAL's Vetiver. This one right here. It was a salty vetiver fragrance, light enough to wear in the heat, but strong enough because it had these woodsy notes to wear all year round for it to last. It had notes of vetiver with spices. There was definitely a tobacco-ish touch here with sandalwood, tonka beans, and definitely the sea salt. And the sea salt is the unique note that they've contrasted with the vetiver to give you this kind of like salty, a bit marine touch with the earthy, kind of like a damp vetiver fragrance. Wonderful fragrance. Sadly, it's discontinued. But there is a great inexpensive alternative. This is definitely inexpensive. It's a male targeted release, but I believe Vetiver might have been a male targeted release as well. I can't quite remember right now. Most likely it is. As you can see, this is a vintage ANNICK GOUTAL bottle. They don't make that fragrance anymore, but you can use Encre Noir Sport from the house of LOEWE as a great alternative. Man, it smells so similar to me. There's a saltiness in here, and I don't know where they're getting that from, but perhaps they are throwing in some saltiness in here, but it's vetiver with cypress. There's water notes. There's grapefruit, lavender, bergamot, nutmeg, cashmere, and woods and musk. It's a great, great alternative for ANNICK GOUTAL's vetiver. It's one of my all-time favorite vetiver fragrances. Sadly, it was discontinued pretty early on in my journey here with fragrance reviewing, but I have this bottle. It still smells great because it doesn't really have any fresh notes in there, so the top notes are still perfect as it is. And of course, if you cannot find that fragrance, Encre Noire Sport by Lalique will definitely do a great job as an alternative for GOUTAL or ANNICK GOUTAL's vetiver. So many of you have been messaging me to find out where you can buy a bottle of Muglaire's Pure Havane. L'Oreal is not re-releasing this fragrance. It's been discontinued, put away. I don't think that L'Oreal is going to focus on male fragrances. At least it doesn't look like it. But who knows what they're doing behind the scenes. There are a couple of alternatives for Pure Havane. Pure Havane is one of my favorite flankers from Mugler. It's just sad that it's gone. It was probably one of the most popular from this collection of fragrances from Mugler for men. But I don't know what L'Oreal decides, as I said. If you don't have a bottle, there are two alternatives. One really inexpensive, one more expensive. The first one I'm going to talk to you about is Naxos from the house of Xerjoff. This Naxos seems to be the most popular fragrance from Xerjoff. Every time I go to a store and ask the folks that are selling Xerjoff, they say Naxos is pretty much the biggest seller. I can see why. I like the combination. In fact, I recently had a client come in and do a sniff session in my studio, and they were asking for specific fragrances, and they sampled this, and they said this is one of the best fragrances they've smelled. So I can see it's got a very universal appreciation for that particular fragrance. People tend to love it over and over again. It's honey, tobacco, lavender, cinnamon, tonka beans, vanilla, cashmere, and bergamot, jasmine, and lemons. And of course, the original Pure Havane was taking the original Mugler DNA and adding honey and tobacco, vanilla with cacao, and then of course patchouli, amber, styrax, and labdanum was in there as well. So if you can't afford this one, and if you can find this one, because I don't know what the status of this is, I still have my bottle. Very, very cheap bottles. As you can see, this thing kind of comes off and falls off, so I've taped it up. This is Insurrection 2 Wild, which I think I bought for like 15 bucks almost 10 years ago. It's very similar to Mugler's Pure Havane. It's got tobacco, it's got honey, it's got vanilla, spices, tonka beans, cacao, and woods. If you can find it, get it. If you're looking for Pure Havane, you can't find it, these two fragrances will definitely do great for you. This is like a dupe, I believe. I believe this is totally a dupe. It wasn't quite identical, but it definitely had very similar smell to Pure Havane. And of course, don't forget the Naxos from the house of Xerjoff. Two great alternatives, I think. Alright, the next fragrance I'm going to talk to you about is Maison Francis Kurkdjian's A Pomme, A Piece of Me pour Homme, A Pomme pour Homme. That's one fragrance that got discontinued a couple years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago now that I think about it. To me also, this kind of reminded me a little bit of Francis Kurkdjian's perfumer work for Gaultier's Gaultier 2. So I haven't got my nose on the current version of Gaultier 2 yet. Hasn't launched here. I don't know when I'm going to get my nose on it. But a great alternative to A Pomme, A Piece of Me, is Kobe by Xerjoff. Once again, we're talking about another Xerjoff fragrance. Xerjoff's Kobe is a unisex fragrance. A Pomme pour Homme is male targeted, obviously. I think it's very unisex. And to me, they both smell very, very similar. Although, I feel like Kobe, on the other hand, from Xerjoff, is a bit more powderier than A Piece of Me or A Pomme pour Homme. But to me, it's that combination of orange blossom or orange flower with amber and woods in the A Pomme pour Homme. But with Kobe, it's got neroli, it's got orange, it's got petitgrain, there's orange blossom, there's bergamot, rosewood, benzoin, ambergris, tonka beans. So this is definitely like a warm, ambery, orange blossom citrus fragrance, if that makes sense. So if you like the idea of something like that with that orange blossom and the orange tree pretty much, because it also has petitgrain. I don't get much of a petitgrain here, so there might be some little changes or differences between the two. But if you have been looking for an alternative for A Pomme pour Homme from the house of Maison Francis Kurkdjian, Kobe from House of Xerjoff would be a great, great alternative. I suggest if these are more expensive fragrances, you sample them somehow, buy samples, go to a store and sample them, because some of them, you know, to me they're great alternatives. You might think, oh my god, that doesn't smell like that particular fragrance. I feel like people smell different things, but for me they're Not identical until I say it's a dupe, so it would be a great alternative for a poem. Kobe is a great alternative. Alright, up next, go into the house of Halston. Z14 is the fragrance. It's a chypre leather fragrance for men that was launched in the late 70s, and I believe I got my nose on this for the first time through my dad and my uncle. They both wore it in 1981. So for me, I felt like it was a great fragrance. I loved the way it smelled. It left a great trail. I think that's probably why I smelled it, because my dad was an oversprayer. But unfortunately, current formulation under Revlon is just not that great. But a great alternative of it, I think, is the Raja Parfums Apex fragrance. Not the new one, the Parfum, or the latest version that came out, but the original version of Apex. Great alternative for Z14, because what Revlon has done with Z14, they butchered it. It smells very cheap and synthetic. And I don't consider Revlon as a brand to launch great fragrances. Sadly, that's the case. A lot of their fragrances are completely butchered for Halston. But Apex, man, it smells super fantastic. It's a chypre leather fragrance, and we know that Raja Parfums or Raja Dub loves chypres. This is a masculine chypre, and of course it totally reminds me of Z14 from Halston. And of course, for me, at one time, Z14 also reminded me of Italian Cypress by Tom Ford, so that is also an alternative, but that's been long gone as well. For now, the best alternative for Z14, I think, a more rich, a more luxurious, and more accurate smelling alternative for Z14 is Apex from the house of Raja Parfums. I really think it's great. It's a great fragrance. It totally brings back memories. And for me, if I want to smell this particular fragrance the way it used to be back in the old days, I put my nose on Raja Parfums Apex. Have you guys compared those two before? Do you get the similarities? Do let me know. Put a comment down below so I can find out. Alright, up next, another male targeted release, one that came out in 1990 or 91, somewhere around there. It's Balenciaga's Pour Homme, and I think a great alternative for it is Zino Davidoff. They're not identical, but I think Zino Davidoff is a great alternative for Balenciaga Pour Homme. And of course, Zino Davidoff is also very inexpensive. I bought this one for about 20 bucks during the pandemic, so I'm sure it's still selling for about the same price, if not much more than that. But for me, Balenciaga Pour Homme is a patchouli bomb. It's got lots of spices as well. It's warm and spicy and ambery, and of course it's got honey touches and some leathery undertones and woods as well. Really great fragrance. Sadly, it's discontinued. It's a great fragrance. As you can see, mine is a really old bottle. I love patchouli. It's a masculine patchouli, but for me, Zino Davidoff, it also kind of has similarities, but it has a bit more aromatic edge to it rather than just being patchouli and amber, like amber and spices like the Balenciaga. For me, the Zino Davidoff has that patchouli and the ambery touches, but it also has a lot of woods and also aromatics like lavender and clary sage. But if you've been eyeing, looking for a bottle of Balenciaga Pour Homme, and you like the idea of it with aromatics, definitely Zino Davidoff, I think is really great. The only difference is, as I said, that this one is a lot more spicy and this one's more aromatic. So aromatic herbs rather than like actual spices with the Balenciaga. But that, when you kind of change those up a little bit and add the the aromatics to the Balenciaga and then add the spices to the Zino, I think they will start smelling very similar. So either way, great alternative for Balenciaga Pour Homme, Zino Davidoff. Have you guys compared those two? Do let me know. Put a comment down. I think it's funny, I think around the early 90s, the very early 90s, maybe the late 80s, there were a lot of patchouli-focused fragrances that were launched for men. This might have come out around 86, I believe, so towards the end of the 80s, but a lot of those fragrances were really awesome. I love them, and I think Zino Davidoff, if you can get it for really inexpensive, I think it's totally worth it, not even as an alternative to Balenciaga Pour Homme. And then finally, the last and final alternative is for the now discontinued Café Tuberosa from the house of Atelier Cologne, and the alternative for it is Cartusia's Terra Mia. There's differences here, but in the end they're very similar. For me, Café Tuberosa was also sort of similar to Intense Cafe, but not as milky lactonic, more like a dry ground coffee or drip coffee with cacao, tuberose, rose, vanilla, cardamom, bergamot, and orange. The only difference would be here is the Terra Mia is similar. It does have the addition of hazelnut, so it's a little nutty, but it's missing the tuberose. Once you get the tuberose in here, it will be identical to the Cafe Tuberosa. But sadly, I don't have a fragrance that features the tuberose along with the coffee and you know, the rose and things like that. But for me, I think it's a great alternative. You do smell very similar, except that for that it's missing the tuberose. But in the end, for me, they're both dry. They're ground coffee, drip coffee, not milky whatsoever, and that's why I feel like it would be a great alternative, Terra Mia for Cafe Tuberosa. This is sadly, it's discontinued. It's a great fragrance. I do have a backup bottle of it. It still smells really, really great. It does remind me of Intense Cafe with the addition of tuberose. Yeah, the brand Atelier Cologne is not even delivering to the States anymore, so you'd have to go to France to buy them. And this is also great. It's just, like I said, it's like, kind of like Intense Cafe once again, but it does have the addition of the nuttiness, and then it's just missing a bit of tuberose, but it does have like neroli and orange blossom in here as well. So there are a little bit of a floral touch, but it doesn't replicate the tuberose that's in here. But either way, I think you can get away with wearing Terra Mia by Cartusia to replace Cafe Tuberosa from the house of Atelier Cologne. Anyway, that's the list for you guys. 10 alternatives to, well, 11 alternatives to 10 different discontinued or badly reformulated fragrances. If you know of any great alternatives to discontinued or badly reformulated fragrances, do let me know. Put a comment down below. Tell me the name of the fragrance that's discontinued or reformulated and doesn't smell as great as it used to, and the alternative for it, so I can find out and perhaps check them out. But also let me know if you've tested these and compared them to the discontinued or discontinued or badly reformulated fragrances. I'd like to find out what you guys think about it, because noses do smell differently. Some people don't think they are. I think they are, but you can always check as well. Buy samples or decants or someplace, or you know, the cheap ones are definitely cheap to buy. You can just buy the bottles outright, or go to the store and smell the more expensive ones. Either way, guys, thanks so much for tuning in today. If you have any questions or comments, please list below. Please like this video, please share it. Follow me on Instagram and Facebook, and I'll be back with more videos very soon. Have a good one. Goodbye.